Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Malcolm's Show, Stream of Consciousness edition. Today I'm trying something a little bit different, so I'm going to have two games running simultaneously. To chess fans, we know this is called a simultaneous, and to people that are new to chess, the idea of a simultaneous is fairly self-explanatory. The idea is one player, for in this case, generally it's white, no matter what level it's being played at, plays against multiple opponents playing black. It can go the other way. As far as I'm aware, at the professional level, it's always been done that the player playing multiple opponents plays white. I think because of tradition. I'm not entirely sure. There might be a specific reason for it. It might just be that's because that's how it goes. So the idea that I'm trying to field test is something. Well, basically, it's an expansion on simulation theory. So I figure if we have simulation theory, then at the same time we can have simultaneous theory. So simulation theory, for those who don't know, is the idea that we live in a computer-generated simulation and that everything we live, breathe, see, feel, hear, touch, everything of it is computer-generated, which is kind of like an endgame scenario for what the singularity is. So for example, I think it's Robert Kurzweil was one of the first guys to ever talk about singularity and what that means for humanity, and it's essentially a merging of technology and humanity. Something I refer to as merging biological algorithms with digital algorithms, because between the two of them, a biological algorithm, humans, other animals, plants, bacteria, and then digital algorithms, whether they be for search engines, security contractors, social media, streaming platforms, eventually they'll just kind of overlap because everything that is provided by the digital algorithms has become so ingrained in biological algorithm lifestyle that eventually there will be a synchronization of it. In my previous episode, I talked a little bit about how organ systems of biological creatures will likely synchronize to some effect. I understand this is a bit of a outlandish theory for some. However, the idea to me I felt was quite obvious because the idea that it's quite commonly accepted already that our dopamine systems will, to some extent, be trained to cooperate with an algorithm because it will understand that the algorithm provides dopamine in return for behaviors. So if that's the case, then eventually other neurotransmitters will follow suit, and from that, it's reasonable to infer that, for example, the endocrine system with its hormones may adapt as well. Because if neurochemicals are being released in response to triggers from internet interactions, for instance, scrolling through a timeline, scrolling through social media, searching anything up on the internet, picking options from algorithm suggestions on streaming platforms, or interacting with security contractors that help make our internet devices safe, or even something as simple as playing a game of chess online or other games, whatever floats your boat. Once we understand that these systems will eventually synchronize to us in the same way that our behaviors become more and more synchronized with our habits. So, for instance, your morning routine, mine is wake up, go for a shower, brush my teeth, get dressed, make a protein shake, and most days of the week it's go to jiu-jitsu, and then day sort of goes from there. Everybody's routine is different. However, because we have that repeated instance, we sort of develop our own biological algorithm of how to do that. For instance, I know that when I get out of bed, the first thing I need to do is get my towels, get ready for the bathroom. Something I'm doing in the summer at the moment because currently it's much, much warmer than it is usually. I get myself a sip of water to make sure I'm not too dehydrated from the evening before. It's an adaptation of my biological algorithm to the circumstances, in the same way that a digital algorithm might adapt when it sees behavioral changes. So, with that in mind, simulation theory kind of, to me, the idea of simultaneous simulations makes sense. So if we consider that we're in a simulation, at least from an individual perspective, then it's entirely reasonable to consider that we're in a simulation from multiple perspectives, and that the perspective that and it's the same way like the color that I see is blue, green, or red might not necessarily be the exact same hue that somebody else sees. However, there's a common consensus between us that we can call those colors blue, green, and red. In the same way that what I perceive as a sensible idea in the simulation might not be a sensible idea to everybody in the simulation. So what we can infer from that is that each individual perspective has an independent simulation. So the idea that we all have an independent simulation, to me, I think, sorry, I shouldn't say assume that we do. On the proposal that we do, we could argue that each individual, if you could almost take it from a matrix perspective, if every human being is in a pod that's being cared for and maintained by machines, then at the same time, if we're in a simulation, then it's entirely possible that every single person I interact with, from my perspective within simulation, is behaving in a way in response to my simulation's coding, as well as my requests and needs and wants and all that sort of thing. And every other person is also interacting in the world from their perspective from their simulation. The tricky thing about this is it becomes very multi-dimensional, and it's starting to touch into levels of science that I don't yet understand. However, if anybody who's watching this does, please feel free to leave a comment and educate me where I'm wrong. I love learning. I love learning generally, especially if I've accidentally been spewing something that's been incorrect. I love getting corrected in that sense. Preferably with, some reasonable reasoning to it. If there's any sources that are, credible to and valid for that, even better. Makes everybody a bit more smarter. The other thing that I'm quite curious about is that if we are all in simultaneous simulations, so for example, if myself, friend A, friend B, friend C, friend D, friend E, friend F, G, and H, for the sake of chess, if all 8 of them and me makes 9, if all 9 of us are simultaneously experiencing reality through our own independent perspectives, then not only are we, quote unquote, playing chess against each other, perhaps more in a cooperative way than a competitive manner, we could argue that we're playing chess as a team against some other team. So for example, for the sake of simple math, we'll go with tens here. Let's say there's 10 versions of me across different dimensions, all playing chess simultaneously, and then there's 10 versions of all of my 8 friends playing chess in their simultaneous across their realities. So that gives us 90 versions of reality to work with. So if there's 90 versions of reality to work with from just our independent perspectives across the 10 different dimensions, then you can see quite quickly how large this can expand. So in the same sense that the universe is always expanding, so is our ability to understand. It's kind of like learning. So something I came across recently, this seems like a tangent, I'll bring it back around, is that the universe is always expanding. It's an interesting idea that life is always trying to expand as well. So because life is always trying to expand, then because digital algorithms are a reflection of our biological algorithms, then the constant expansion deliberated by digital algorithms is, you could argue in some ways to perpetuate its own life, is to expand its data set, because the more data it has, the more precise a calculation it can compute, I think is the word, as well as a more accurate prediction model it can create, and then serve its function better. So the better it serves its function, the happier its creators are. In the same way that a better biological algorithm serves its functions, the better its controller is. And you could argue by definition, if you're at work, the biological algorithm that you action upon your workplace will make your superiors happy. If you're self-employed, the biological algorithms you apply to satisfy your customers and clientele makes them happy. If you run a business, biological algorithms, if you run a business with several employees and it's much bigger than just you being self-employed, then effectively your biological algorithm kind of becomes the culture of the company. I don't want to get too off track here. I want to try and stay in the thread of simultaneous simulations. So the idea that I'm working with here, and this might sound a little out there, is so far we've got streamable audio services, we have streamable video services, we have streamable gaming services. I don't think it's unreasonable that at some point in the future we will have streamable virtual reality services, and then streamable augmented reality services, and then streamable mixed reality services. So with these various reality streaming services, and think about the gravity of what that means is we will have reality streaming services, whether they be augmented, virtual, or mixed reality. Between all of that, that means that everything we interact with online will create a reality that we can inhabit to such realism that we won't be able to distinguish it. It might be completely imperceivable from reality. So, as the technology becomes more sophisticated and humans get better at identifying quite what they want from reality, then effectively they'll become like dream simulation machines. And this is where it does get a little bit matrixy. Because think about it right now. No matter which streaming platform I'm going on, it's doing its best to record all of my interests, all of my preferences, click-through rates, everything the mouse hovers over, which videos I like, which ones I remove from my suggestions, and I'm sure probably genuinely a million other metrics, if not many million, put it that way. If there was a billion metrics, it wouldn't surprise me. Honestly, these algorithms are far more sophisticated than I think the average user understands. It's probably far more complicated than even most of the engineers working on them understand. It's definitely beyond my comprehension how they work perfectly, and I'm doing this from an external perspective. So the idea that, for instance, if we take Alphabet's mainstream platform algorithm in the form of YouTube, that is terrific at understanding people. It's managed to understand me with such precision that it has accurately predicted sexual partner preference before the partner has come round to my house. Which sounds ridiculous, and the problem is, to show you any proof, I feel it's a violation of trust of the person it was describing. The tricky thing is the videos came into my feed like 4 days before the date. So that's not just the fact there's at least 4 days prediction ahead of time. It's 4 days of prediction of my behavior synchronized with somebody else's behavior. So the algorithm knew not only who I was behaving with, who I was interacting with, how the interactions were going, despite the fact that we were not communicating on an alphabet-based service. Which sounds daft, I know. It does sound a little bit out there. However, it's what happened. I don't care if it sounds a little bit kooky. It's what happened, and I can only tell you my experience of it. So from that we can extrapolate at least 4 days ahead of time, understands how I interact with other people, to the point where perhaps my interactions with YouTube's algorithm communicate my behaviors, my emotions, my thoughts, and my other actions in such a way that it will understand my interactions from other devices. Another theory might be that another idea is that it's entirely, there's a merging of algorithms. For example, it might be that Alphabet and Meta share algorithmic overlap. It might be that Alphabet's algorithm is so sophisticated it understands behavior from other algorithms. It wouldn't surprise me. The level that these guys are playing on, you have to think as the CEO of these companies, as the head programmer of these companies, as the person that has to answer to the chairman of the board of what the company's doing, what direction it's going in, how it's going to get there, and on what timeline. Which to me kind of speaks volumes about how seriously they take these sort of things. Because even at the level that we might not take it as seriously as they do, we need to understand that the playing field is... I'm not sure I like that phrasing. I think the most important thing to consider is that if we are all basically living a simultaneous simulation, then the original point was, if we all have our own simultaneous versions of reality that are through a simulation theory, then the algorithms that produce the simulations we live in might just simply be reflections of our own biological algorithms throughputed through a conduit such as a streaming platform's algorithm, which then produces the inhabitable reality. So for instance, every time I interact with YouTube, it updates my preferences and produces a video that, let's say whenever I leave this room and enter the outside world, it does its best effort as it can to produce a reality that mimics the efforts within that video. So let's say, for example, I only ever watch podcasts, then perhaps a mixed reality streaming service would understand that I enjoy long form conversation and do its best to put me in as many long form conversation situations as possible. Now, it's equally simple to argue that maybe that's just my biological algorithm telling me that I quite like long form conversation, and I will make the effort to speak to my friends that are not just comfortable with long form conversation and enjoy long form conversation, enjoy my long form conversation, will then seek out to talk to me as such as that. However, it's not a one or the other situation. They're working in harmony. Just like on the chessboard here, every time I make a move, black responds with the move. I do want to clarify for users that once I get to 10 episodes of this podcast with white, I will be doing 10 episodes with black. Just make sure that's clear. Because, well, I don't know, it just made sense to me at the time, and if I've written it down, I want to commit to it. Not the point. The point I was making is that if we're all simultaneously generating our best realities, because that's kind of what we want to do, whether our best reality is becoming a doctor with a knighthood that's a multi-billionaire with, family with 6 kids, all of that, or your ideal reality is just taking life one day at a time and making each day absolutely count, just being grateful you're awake, you're breathing, you're conscious, all of that. No matter which polarity of that you're looking at, either it's just that one day at a time or you're thinking about a legacy that's, incalculably long, the point is the algorithm is still working on a scale of its own. So the prediction models it's got, for example, this chess computer here, I know that the chess engines that that Stockfish runs in the evaluation can go 99 moves deep. So if we use that as an example for a simple chess engine, and yes, we know Stockfish is one of the most powerful chess engines ever, it is, however, freely available. So if that's a freely available chess engine that can run 99 moves deep on one of the more complicated games in the world, it's not unreasonable to think that the algorithms that are predicting our behaviors on streaming platforms and social media, it's not unreasonable to consider that they might also be able to predict our behaviors, or at least plan contingencies for various behavior patterns 99 moves deep. That might be 99 days, it might be 99 weeks for all we know. It's not an unreasonable idea considering how long these services have been available and how much data they have on us all. It might just be 99 specific clicks, it might be 99 comments, likes, shares, subscriptions. You get the idea of it. So this is all running simultaneously. Then it produces an environment in which we have to interact with it on the basis of simultaneous behavior. So let's say, for example, I'm spending time with 3 friends. I have to divide my attention between the 3 friends in a manner that feels appropriate to the context. It might be that friend A has a specific scenario going on in their life and they require a little more attention from me than the others because they're the one that the group has come together to help out. It might be friends B and C are going through a situation and friend A and myself have to help them out. Whichever the specifics of it are is not necessarily the point here. The point is understanding that we will be interacting in various manners. So it could be many against the all against the all against the all, whichever way we look at it, is understanding that the simultaneous nature of a simultaneous simulation is kind of the idea of multitasking, or anybody who's done public speaking knows the idea that when you're speaking to smaller audiences, it does make a big difference to not just direct your eye contact and body language at 1 or 2 out of a crowd of 10 or 20. The idea is you communicate with all of them as effectively as you can, and when the people who are paying attention are actually interacting with you, you interact back with them to, reward their engagement, use a somewhat clinical term. It's like, oh, they're actually listening, so I can maintain a little longer eye contact with them, let them know that I appreciate that they're listening to me, and then perhaps the person next to them might switch on a bit more, wake up to what's going on, and listen more as well. A little bit as in, if you know the audience better, you can produce a better product for them. So what it seems a little bit odd that I'm trying to test this theory via a chess match. However, the idea that I'm going with here is that if I can understand how to simultaneously play chess matches, then it might work on multiple levels, that I better understand how to interact with multiple people at once. So an idea I've been doing to test this theory is that essentially, instead of interacting with one person at a time, I've been making a much better effort to interact with two people at a time. And instead of interacting with just two people at a time, I would eventually like to interact with three people at a time and four people at a time and things like that. And I feel that the only way I'm going to get better at that is by practicing it in various contexts. So if the various contexts I'm practicing it in happen to be chess, for starters, and then it's with close friends, and then it's with acquaintances, and then maybe eventually be with colleagues. The idea is there is a sort of personal reason for me doing it, because I want to understand how to behave simultaneously. One of the personal reasons I want to do this, I'm not comfortable sharing on the camera because I just don't think it's appropriate. It's nothing strange or illegal, it's just personal. And to be quite honest, the idea that I feel an internal pressure to disclose that information, despite knowing myself well enough that I don't want to share that information, I find kind of interesting, because it makes me wonder what's encouraging me to share that information in the first place. Because part of me is quite aware of the idea that if we have streamable reality services, then we will be able to forge a reality almost entirely from a digital algorithm's understanding of our biological algorithms. And as a digital algorithm better understands biological algorithms, the digital algorithm, for instance, with me, it understood my dating life without me even being aware that it knew I had a dating life. It's understood aspects of my childhood which I don't know how it managed to get an understanding of. It might be that my online behaviours are monitorable in such a way that, I mean, to be fair, if it's been trolling data, if it's YouTube, then Google's probably been trolling data on me for, Christ, I don't know when I first did a Google search. We could definitely say that's at least 15, probably at least 18 years. I might have been using Internet Explorer at first. A very long time. When did I start using Chrome? I'm not sure how many years exactly. Maybe we could safely say 14 years at least. Maybe 15. The point stands is that's a very, very long time for something that it's entirely possible that it has managed to monitor information about me to such a extent that it does know not only the stuff that I was searching all those 14, 15, 16 years ago, as well as being aware of my behaviors through that time and perhaps in my preceding behaviors. So if it's understanding my preceding behaviors as well, then I think it's only sensible to think that these algorithms do know us not just better than we know ourselves. We have to really think about the stuff that we may never disclose to anybody, ever. Think of your deepest, darkest secrets, the stuff that you will quite happily take to your grave with you. When we consider the algorithm not only knows that, it factors that into its decision making, then we're dealing with something that has the power to entirely exploit you. it knows what you are not just embarrassed about, it knows what you're ashamed about. And anything that knows that can use that against you. Whether it does or not, we don't know. The idea of how it might function in a simultaneous reality, to me, it's on. Say you were streaming, you had two pairs of earphones, you had one in each ear. You could play the same song in each one. However, they might, to get them perfectly synchronized, be very, very difficult, and your brain would be able to tell the difference. So, if your brain's able to distinguish the difference between the two of them quite easily, then it's not unreasonable to imply or infer that everything we're doing interacts on multiple levels. So when everything interacts on multiple levels, then the mere fact that there are multiple levels ensures the fact that there's multiple ways to look at it. And when there's multiple ways to look at it, the multiple perspectives, it almost forces us to consider the other perspectives. So in the same way that, like, when you're communicating with somebody, you have to consider their perspective, in the same way that when I'm on the chessboard here, I can look at things from my perspective. I also have to be wary of their perspective. So being able to read the board in such a way, or read social cues, or any sort of situation, in part it's thinking about not only about what they want to achieve, it's the little side steps to it as well, and what other points might come together. So if we understand the various points that come together, then we can, it's like having multiple projects going on in your life at once. So say you've got your professional life, you've got your, for instance, in my case, my professional life, academic life, my what I call training life, which is my exercise routine and all the various parts to it, and then my personal life. Within each of those four dimensions, so for example, at work, I'm doing an accreditation, which is going to make me a little bit more skilled, which will, move me up the ladder that little bit further. As far as academic stuff goes, it's the summer holidays. However, I'm still doing some reading and making plans to best prepare myself for the next term of university. In my training life, I'm doing as best as I can to listen to all my coaches and put my maximum effort into everything I'm doing. It's like that's a broad overview to it. However, there's the skill part of it, there's the strength and power part of it, there's the cardio and conditioning part of it. And then in my personal life, there's my family, there's my friends, and there's my romantic life. So between those three aspects, I mean, you could think about it. If each of those four, my professional, academic, training, and personal, if each of those has at least three rubrics between it, then that's 12 options right there. And if they're all working simultaneously, I have to figure out best how to coordinate them. In the same way that, there's 8 pieces behind the 8 pawns that I have to interact. I have to coordinate in such a manner that they don't, lose. Ooh, excuse me. Sorry, this is requiring a little more brain power than I thought to be able to talk about this whilst doing two at once. That's also what's bothering me is that. Right. So I think we want to go this way. And that one. Right, okay. So I've written a slightly longer set of notes for this week. So stuff I had about simulation theory. Bring that up. So A theory of simultaneous simulations, which we will be testing with applying similar to algorithms instead of our usual one. Yeah, so on the basis of a multiverse, then simulation theory can work via simultaneous simulations. Every independent simulation is interacting with every other simulation, interlinking simulations across dimensions. Each independent simulation can interact with other simulations, similar in form to a chess match, and multiple simulations can interact via simultaneous chess matches, which may be one versus all, some versus all, or all versus all. So when an avatar is able to simultaneously interact with external simulations, there's scope for improving multitasking abilities. Okay, so I feel like that's covered. Something that goes along with patterns and whatnot, we can go through that in a little bit. So the streaming of various, alternative reality, mixed reality, virtual reality, we touched on that a little bit. And the way I sort of looked at it is if we can stream virtual reality, then it's like watching dreams be brought to life by algorithms that can only produce accurate representations of your dream world if you trust the algorithm with your most personal information. And then streamable mixed reality is like watching creative projects be brought to life in an interactive way by algorithms that require you to put all your trust in them to produce the most tailored end result. Okay. So something I was wanting to look into a little bit more is I've talked a little bit about the military industrial complex and something I call the medical industrial complex. So the next stage to that I feel is something I call the media industrial complex. So, media industrial complex. So some keywords I added for that. If we start off with something like it was brainwashing, conditioning, hypnosis, ideology, indoctrination, mind control, pre-programming, propaganda. These things all kind of overlap in some way, and it's not that different from like just general advertising. So, for example, a strong advertising campaign works kind of because it wants to brainwash you into thinking that that specific product is the best fit for you. In the same way it's conditioning you, in the same way that behavioral conditioning works, in the same way that it's trying to hypnotize you to believe that there's a specific product that's better than every other product and the only one that you should really bother with is their one. Ideology. There's quite a famous image I remember seeing on the internet somewhere about how brands might become religions, turn customers into followers and like worshippers and stuff like that. This isn't anything new. The idea of making brands religious icons is quite an old marketing concept. Indoctrination, I feel, is kind of the same idea. It's making people think the way you want them to think and thinking, okay, well, if product A is the best product, then I have to have product A, in such a way that they might design a curriculum to teach you that, which ignores product B, even though maybe product B is actually better for you, especially in your circumstances, or maybe product B is just better for you because product A actually isn't great for your particular profile. And same way, mind control, it works kind of like brainwashing, except it's perhaps a little more direct. Pre-programming, it's the idea of, well, it's like telegraphing in combat sports and martial arts, or openings in chess. So, for example, with the Sicilian defence and this variation, if I had opened slightly differently, then I might have been aware of a different opening and responded differently because that's a pre-programmed event because I kind of know what's going on. Pre-program can work on a subconscious basis though and do its best to condition you without you realising. I just want to make clear that no matter how aware or conscious or attuned somebody might feel they are, there will always be somebody better. In the same way, like, it doesn't matter how good I get at chess, someone's always going to be better than me. It doesn't matter how good Alpha Zero gets at chess, there will eventually be an engine that beats Alpha Zero. It doesn't matter what the discipline is, eventually something will surpass it. It's the nature of change, it's the nature of progress, it's just kind of what the humans like doing. And the final word I had in that was propaganda, because an advertising campaign kind of is propaganda to encourage you to feel a certain way about a certain product or service. So I kind of looked at it as a media industrial complex because to some extent it's the effects of capitalistic behavior on society. So if capitalistic behavior results in people worshipping money, then we have to consider how they're worshipping money. Are they worshipping the spending of money, or are they worshipping the saving of money, and or the making of money, for example? And then depending which way that goes, it depends on how it affects the culture. And I think that's a really key point to consider is how we're conditioned to society by society to behave, and whether or not we're making sensible decisions when we interact with society. So simply because a lot of the world trends towards capitalistic nature, I think capitalism is kind of the natural continuation of survivalism because it's the idea of survival of the fittest, except we can add an ethical consideration simply because we have the higher reasoning abilities to do so that we might not have had when we were all monkeys and before that when cavemen and all that jazz. So let's have a little look at the notes out here. Yeah, that makes sense. So I was looking at it a little bit that if the media industrial complex is built up of things such as uh, it's it kind of boils down to audio and video. So whether you're listening to something or you're watching something, whatever you're listening or watching to is in some ways it's ideological, even when it's as purely fact based as it can be. So for example, let's say we're watching two chess engines play against each other. If you watch them long enough, you'll eventually start understanding the play style of each that little bit better. When you understand the play style of each that little bit better, you might be able to see it reflected in real players. So, without accurately assigning play style to human players, let's say, for example, Stockfish is like Anatoly Karpov and Alpha Zero is more like Garry Kasparov. The two of them go up head to head several times. Kasparov wins more. It doesn't mean that Karpov was bad. Karpov was world champion, and if it wasn't for Kasparov, probably would still be world champion for quite a while. There wasn't really much competition against him. He was the only other person that Garry Kasparov faced in the finals for well over a decade, if not almost two, before I think it was Anand. I think it was when Vasanathan Anand came up. I may have pronounced that wrong. I'm sorry. It's a name I haven't had to say it loud in a while. So with that in mind, it's this tricky thing is because everything digital is an objective output from subjective input, and no matter how objectively neutral we try to create something, it's still going to have some undertones of subjectivity. I could write you a cookbook which has recipes that are designed purely to make you healthy rather than taste good, because subjectively I could say food is fuel, it doesn't need to taste great so long as it's stomachable and keeps you going. And then you can say, oh, yeah, I want a cookbook that just gives me what I need to stay alive and stay healthy and optimum nutrition, right? And then within that, I could say, well, then hang on, how am I listing these ingredients? Am I listing them alphabetically? Am I listing them by order of adding to, if I'm baking a cake, do I list them in the order I add them to the bowl? Do I list things like that? Because if I list them in order of sequencing, then is my recipe the objectively best recipe, or is it just my subjective impression of what the best cake tastes like? In the same way that if I add instructions to it, every word I'm using, it might be the most clinically neutral term I can think of. It's still written by a human. It's still in the cookbook. Let's say I left aligned the entire text, it's still that's something slightly subjective about my understanding of how my culture interprets written text. If I'd centrally aligned it or brought it to the bottom left of the page with the left or center alignment, or even right aligned it, then all these little differences, they affect how you interpret the information. It seems tiny. It really seems like tiny details, but they matter. They really matter. And I think anybody that willfully overlooks this stuff is being ignorant to the power that these, not just algorithms, these technologies have. Everything on this page, for example, everything from these fonts to how these are spaced out to the colouring of why it's that grey or that grey or whatever, it's all chosen very deliberately. In the same way that the recording software I'm using is designed in a specific manner. I screenshotted this script and put it in Paint. Paint was designed in a specific way by Microsoft, and it's not just for functionality. There is an aesthetic component factored into it as well. So ignoring that is naive, and it makes me wonder, what is their intent with the aesthetic production? Are they producing it to look specifically good or bad, or is it, well, they're going to make it look good, aren't they? So what's their definition of looking good? Well, we can argue simple things like symmetry are universally agreed upon to be quite beautiful. However, there will be instances where symmetry is not the ideal form of design. So for instance, I can look at the keyboard in front of me. Because there's a number pad to the side, it offsets the central aspect of the lettered keys, and there's no way to mirror the thing entirely. And even then, there's the caps lock on the left, there's the enter button on the right, it's still not mirrored perfectly. So whoever designed the keyboard originally, as well as this modern iteration of a keyboard, they couldn't have the perfect symmetry that is generally found to be aesthetically beautiful. And that's just how it goes. So it's because design is such a critical part of media. It's not just audio and video, it's all the written work that goes alongside with it. So every time you walk down the high street, or you're in a car, or you're on public transport, or you're sitting in your living room let's say you're sitting somewhere on a device that doesn't have an ad blocker on it, and you see an advert, all of that, everything about it is designed to produce a response. And the response about it, to me, I think like the principal idea of sex sells is used quite frequently. And then the idea, well, if sex sells, then that means sexual taste is part of marketing campaigns. And this is slightly off topic about what I want to talk about, however, it's kind of interesting, so we can roll with it. So our biological algorithms all have a very specific manner of what it considers sexy. And then digital algorithms will understand what you find sexy, which then means the algorithms understand our sexual tastes and factor that into our decision making. The question is, to what extent are our sexual tastes factored in to the decision making process? If everything boils down to sex, what's the quote? Everything is about sex except sex. Sex is about power. And then there's another. What was the other quote that I heard from Rogan? I think it was from somebody else originally. I heard it from Joe Rogan. Was, we are the sexual organs of the machines. So if we work with that idea, especially the whole simultaneous simulation thing, then if we're the sex organs of machines, then, and marketing campaigns work to sexually advertise everything. It's not, sex isn't probably the only factor in it all. It's just, I have a feeling like addiction exploitation, such as alcohol, caffeine, and nicotine, is probably quite a large part of it. Then that makes sex part of pre-programming as well. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that sexual tastes are in some way influenced by media. a potentially controversial statement is that the declaration of the people who have become, no, actually not. Sexual promiscuity has become much more pronounced, not just because of various social movements. The media has supported the notion from the get go, and because the media's been so supportive of it, then we could, theoretically infer that the media is in part responsible for the over sexualization of people. And if the media is responsible for the over sex, I feel like I'm having a better train of thought when I was playing that one game in a go rather than the two, which that's something in of itself. If the media is responsible for the over sexualization of people, then by that same merit, the media is responsible in some ways for how sexualization of people happens. So if all of our sexual trends are encouraged, if not pre-programmed by media, then is it possible that anything that is beyond good, clean sex, where it's just, man and woman going at it, doors locked, blinds down, or that sort of thing, how much of that is just natural proclivity from biological algorithms, and how much of that is externally influenced or digitally influenced? Because on one hand, I'm not sure if it would be accurate to say that sexual tastes are externally induced. However, if we hypothetically think that they are, then that means it's possible that our sexual tastes, or some people's sexual tastes, not all people's, they're fabricated. So maybe the more people disconnected from media, the more they'd find out what they're actually into. That's interesting. So hang on, maybe on some level, the people that are more sexually adventurous than the rest of us, put it that way, are more in tune with media. There's some sort of correlation there between sexual behaviour and media usage. And quite what it is, I'm not sure yet. However, there does seem to be some sort of pattern emerging. Okay. So, I'm not sure in future I'll be doing any more of these simultaneous ones. I'll have to see how it goes post release, because it's been an interesting idea and I'm glad I've tried it. I'm just not sure how well it's worked compared to how I intended it to work. Where are we time-wise? Okay. So I've gotten through some of the main ideas I wanted to get through. So something I'd written down in my notes is that algorithms basically work via, Bayesian theories. So Bayesian theories essentially boils down to if it's happened most of the time before, it's the most likely probability in the future. In the same way, statistics can be used to infer results. So the better we understand that, then the better we can understand how Bayesian principles work. Bayesian probability is something I've recently been put onto and I'm trying to understand a little better. It's basically, well, it's happened so many times before, it's likely going to happen again. And you can always argue that statistics don't mean as much to the individual. However, they exist for a reason. Statistics don't exist in a vacuum. They've been generally quite consistently produced by people that have a stake to lose if they get it wrong. Which means if you're ignoring the effectivity of statistics, you're perhaps more interested in preserving an ideological perspective than the truth, which is something that just inherently bothers me. The truth is more important than your feelings. And the sad thing is that there are people's feelings I care about, and it can be difficult to communicate some. Well, the thing is, the people's feelings that I care about, I don't want to hurt anybody, physically or emotionally. It was never my intention. The problem is sometimes to maintain integrity and tell the truth, you kind of have to hurt people's feelings because otherwise the truth doesn't get said. And this is something I've said to friends before, is that conflict can be a resolution when it's actioned properly. Like, having a fight sometimes is the best way to resolve a problem, because it actually allows you to discuss what's on your mind rather than just pretend everything's hunky-dory when it really isn't. Because the more people pretend everything's hunky-dory when it really isn't, I think that's a quick road to depression, quite honestly. And I think people that ignore that fact are doing themselves a disservice. The more you live in denial, the more you're not going to understand why you're as upset as you are. And oh, it's a pity. It really is. It's just it can be hard sometimes. It can be very, very hard to life is hard. That's the long and short of it, is life is hard. And when there's so much going on, it can be very difficult to know quite what to do with all the beauty and blessings that we have. Especially when all the beauty and blessings that we have put us in a position is they'll say everything's okay and that they're loving life or they love their job and stuff like that. It's like, I can tell you don't. I can just see it in you. And it's okay not to love something. It's like, you can't force that. You either do or you don't. And it makes me really sad to see friends suffer like that. Because it just doesn't end well. It just doesn't. And that's a slightly sad note to get to the end of this on. Okay. A slightly more positive way to look at that is That's interesting. This game, one mistake, zero blunders, zero missed wins. The other game, one mistake, nine blunders, and one missed win. That's intriguing. Let's correct the bad one first. So the idea with the simultaneous simulations is that if I can interact with multiple people at one time and see their various emotional states, at least from my perspective, then to what effect can I use my simulation to affect them without having a direct line of communication to them? So, for instance, a friend of mine who I saw recently, who, at least from my perspective, wasn't being entirely truthful with me about his feelings, about their feelings, sorry, about their feelings. It's if their simulation is working in a way where they benefit best from denial of truth, what's affected their simulation for that to happen? Because I don't think that's entirely organic occurring. I mean, this might sound a little bit of an exaggeration. It's not meant to be exaggerating to say it. I think any algorithm that's not self-reproducing, whether biologically like finding kids or being creative or anything, which is producing more of itself in the same way like a digital algorithm wants to produce more engagement, whichever way you want to put it, the more that happens, anything that's not doing that, in some way it's suicidal. Not just in the for that that friend might be suicidal, in which case I definitely need to reach out to them. And if not, it's nice to reach out to them anyway. It's just what good friends do. It's to me, it's the idea that being in a position where you don't want to reproduce is like, I know the whole I don't want to have kids. My personal opinion on it is if you don't have kids, that's fine. You don't have kids. I'm not here to force you to have kids. My point is that you not wanting to have kids doesn't speak well of your mental health from my perspective. I think the idea of being child free is an act of avoiding responsibility. It's denial of biological purpose. It's it's often a manifestation of immaturity and a selfishness designed to just want to live one's own life rather than bring forth other life. I get the idea that being a parent can be scary. I really do, and I'm not saying by any means I'm an expert on the matter. It's just the idea of not wanting to be a parent just doesn't seem to make sense to me at all. I get the idea that you might not be your highest calling in life. Maybe you're the world's best this, that, or the other, and you've got to do all this to help the world. And I know that some members of the church swear by celibacy, which to me, again, that doesn't seem like the highest purpose in life. I mean, none of us would be here if any of our parents hadn't reproduced. And if we don't reproduce, then there won't be any more of us left. In the same way that simultaneous simulations, it's like if I've got 6 kids, then I interact with them as simultaneously as I can sometimes, and sometimes I'll be interacting with one or two of them at some time. Sometimes I'll be interacting with 3 or 4 or 5 of them at another time. The point is, I'd have to understand how they all interact with each other, how they coordinate. Oh, yeah. I won't pretend to be an expert on matters I'm not. It doesn't seem right to me that any life form doesn't want to reproduce. It just doesn't. It seems like faulty wiring. I guess I could say that's how I feel about it. That's my opinion. I also think that's maybe not just an opinion on the matter. It's like I'd love to do a study. Of brain scans that compare people who are parents against people who don't want to be parents, and look at the brain structures of it. I'd love to understand if there's differences there, because I bet there will be differences. Simply by, let's say if you're a parent of a 1-year-old or a parent of a 5-year-old, parent of a 10-year-old, etc., and then you could have grandparent brain structures in there as well. That'd be fascinating. The tricky thing is, it'd be very difficult to get any sort of, I guess, funding for it. Would be the critical element. I'm just very confused by people that don't want to have kids. Especially when it's. I think people underestimate their biological drive. Because as you get older, you're probably going to want kids more than you realise. And. Yeah. I don't think I've ever met anybody that regretted having kids. And it's just. Once you're a parent, there's just. It changes how you. Everything. And I know that's very, but it changes how you communicate. Not just vocally, it changes how you communicate physically, because you become so much more self-aware of your body language and what the kid's picking up on and what they're imitating and what's actually clicking with them, and like, oh right, hang on, that's what they're most responsive to, then I've got to factor that into all of my future behaviours. In the same way that every word you use, every vocal, everything that the cameras and microphones are trying to pick up on is from digital algorithms. Whether no matter what that data point is, it's something that as a parent you have to factor into your communication. You simply can't talk to a child the same way you talk to adults. There's just stuff that kids won't understand ahead of time. They just or just don't need to know. It's it's something they might need to know